Good morning, Mr. Makwana. Good morning to everybody.
Morning, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Makwana, are you ready to proceed?
I'm ready, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, prior to proceeding with the evidence of Ms. Hogan, I deemed it prudent that we should bring some of the events which transpired yesterday to your attention. We have received 2 witness statements, or statements, let me put it that way. They are dated the 11th of November 2018. They are both unsigned, and they are in the letterheads of the ANC, and with the name of Mr. Gordhan at the end. I only scanned through the 2 statements. They appear to be, the first one appeared to be a response to Ms. Hogan's evidence, and the other one is a response pertaining to the testimony which was adduced by the banks in terms of term of reference 1.7. I have not as yet canvassed that statement with Ms. Hogan, and furthermore, I have not canvassed both statements with the legal team of the Commission. I thought that it wise to bring those facts to attention, but in due course, after we have formulated an approach to those statements, we'll then approach the chairperson with far much more sensible submissions around those statements. But I thought that I must simply highlight and place those facts on record.
No, thank you very much. I guess the first step is that, excuse me, the first step is that they need to be signed by whoever is making the statements so that they can be taken seriously, because you would not be able to put to the witness what you might regard as Mr. Mantashe's version when you don't have his signature on the statements.
Yes,
so it may well be, therefore, that at some stage in the future, if there is an application for leave to cross-examine Ms. Hogan, if that is what is or may be required, it may be that we might ask her at some stage to come back. But it may well be that there will be no request for leave to cross-examine her, but there may be an application or a request that Mr. Mantashe's version or the ANC's version be placed, put to her for her to comment on. I guess that in due course you will get to know what the position is.
Indeed, Chair, once we have interrogated all those issues, we'll be able to approach the Chair with a proper way forward pertaining to those statements.
Okay, no, thank you.
Yes. Ms. Hogan.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Hogan. Mr. Makwana and I were in part talking about you. so it may be that at some stage in the future you may be asked to come back, and I hope that you would be able to come back.
Sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Hogan, yesterday we parted ways when we were dealing with Annexure K, and that Annexure K is to be found on page 360. You had already testified on Annexure K. You were just about to link it with Annexure L, that is on page 366. You may continue to testify on the contents of Annexure A. You would recall that we adjourned at the point where I said it raised serious issues of governance, and that it raises serious issues that we are conveying to the ex-president, and for that purpose, and with the indulgence from the chair, if you may read the contents of Annexure L into the record, and thereafter give us the context.
Yes, Annexure L is a letter from myself to the President on page 366 here, from myself to the President, and it's dated the 8th of September.
Let me just check again whether you are audible throughout. Everybody can hear the witness? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
They can hear you. Yeah.
Thanks. So it's dated the 8th of September. Chair, you would recall that I had said that after Mr. Gama had been suspended, the Deputy Minister and myself, together with the department, had embarked on a process to selecting candidates for a new Transnet board, not for a new CEO, but for a new board.
I'm terribly sorry, Ms. Hogan. I'm going to interrupt you because of something I should have dealt with before you started. Please don't forget where you were when I interrupted you. I just wish to make the announcement that on Friday, I granted an application that had been brought by Minister Gordhan for an order shifting his evidence from the 15th of November to the 19th of November. I realized yesterday from the media that they were still talking on the basis that he was going to be giving evidence this week. That order was made on Friday, but it's only being distributed to the media today. It wasn't distributed, and it's just important that the public knows that there has been a change in regard to the date when Mr. Gordhan will be giving evidence. The order that I made, which was in accordance with the agreement that the Commission's legal team and Minister Gordhan's lawyers had made, included that apart from giving evidence on the 19th, which is Monday next week, he will remain available on Tuesday the 20th in case he is still needed, and in case I grant any leave to cross-examine that may be brought. I just thought I must let the public know about that, and I should have made it before Ms. Hogan began her evidence. I apologize to have interrupted you. Thank you. Mr. Makwana, you may proceed.
Ms. Hogan, you were at the verge of giving context to Annexure 11,
yes.
Annexure L on page 366. Yes, you may proceed.
Okay, this was a letter to the President from myself, a Transnet chairperson. The Deputy Minister and I were intent on submitting a cabinet memorandum for the appointment of a Transnet board, for some board members to retire, some to stay on, but new members, and that would obviously include a chairperson because there was an acting chair. When that was submitted through the Cabinet Secretariat and whatever, the request came and the President wanted to speak to me about it. Finally, we were able to speak telephonically, and the President then said that he would want, as he had said before, several names as candidates for chairperson, and also he wanted the CV for them, for any candidate, and also the CV of the chairperson of another board that I was taking to Cabinet for approval, and that was the board of a South African, of Safcol, which is a forestry company. So those were immediately forwarded onto the president. I think it was exactly the same day, those CVs and whatever, in response to his request. And a reminder from my department on both, I think it was the 10th and the 11th, to the president, requesting the meeting in this regard.
Yes.
So the letter...
Before you go to the reminders, let's deal first with Annexure L and its contents. What did you convey to the president, if you may read the contents of that letter into the record?
Okay. So firstly, I reminded the president that Transnet has been operating with an acting chair. And at its AGM on the 24th of July, the terms of the board members and the acting chair had to be extended until such time that a new board is appointed. Now, Chair, you will recall that Mr. Garma's disciplinary process really only ended at the end of June, and he was fired. And so to put a board together in 3 weeks in time for an AGM in July would have been impossible. You've got to do a proper job. So once again, and this was the second time, Chair, I had to go to an AGM of Transnet and say, I'm not ready yet to appoint a board, or to address vacancies that were due to occur in the board, as well as the acting chair and the CEO. The second issue I raised mentioned that Transnet was about to engage on an 84 billion five-year expenditure program. It was a massive investment program. Government, from a macroeconomic point of view, had taken the view, and in my view it was a correct view, that massive investment in infrastructure yields results in that it promotes the economy and it provides employment, and therefore both Transnet and Eskom, who were at the point of and needed massive investment, were going to embark on those investments. Now, Transnet was particularly well placed to embark on it because its balance sheet was looking very good. It at least balanced, but it still needed, the borrowings and whatever for that investment. I then said, we need a strong board to oversee this massive investment process, and that it was, because of the importance of Transnet to the economy, it was absolutely important that the chair and the board be appointed. And that my department had prepared a cabinet memorandum for discussion at cabinet, but it was not yet submitted. So this is because we agreed that we would discuss the matter first so that I can ascertain your final views on the composition of the board, in particular the chairperson. So in that telephonic conversation, he had said to wait before submitting because he wanted to see these CVs. I mentioned the name of the two candidates, and then I say, I request an appointment at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter further with the Deputy Minister and myself in order that we are able to discuss your views on the preferred candidate and therefore deal with it. So that was the point.
And this is against the background of correspondence that we've dealt with yesterday and the memoranda which you said that the President did not react to.
Yes, we were wanting to put this memorandum forward. The Cabinet Secretariat advised us that the President first wanted to discuss this.
Now, in relation to Annexure L, after dispatching it to the President, did he react to Annexure L?
Once again, no response. My department, my Secretariat sent a request twice after this letter requesting that urgent meeting, and there was no response from the Presidency.
Now, may I refer you to page 15, paragraph 57 of your witness statement?
Yes.
Now, on page 15, while you were still waiting for those responses from the President, then you recorded the following on paragraph 57. 3 days later, on Sunday, 31st October 2010, the President's office called me to a meeting with him and in the presence of Gordhan, the Secretary General of the ANC. President Zuma said that the NEC has decided to redeploy me as the ambassador to Finland. I declined the redeployment and informed them that I would be resigning as a member of Parliament.
Yeah.
Now, you were expecting a response from the President on a number of issues which you raised with him as per the correspondence that we canvassed yesterday. The response that you received from the President was 3 days later. I'm sure that you did not bargain for it, that you're going to be now redeployed to Finland.
Chair, there had been lots of rumors that I was going to be redeployed. Not redeployed, but I was going to be reshuffled. So, but I had no idea that I was going to be sent as an ambassador to Finland. I raised with the President the question that my partner, Mr. Kathrada, who had spent 26 years in jail, that I could not see my way fit to request him to accompany me for a further 5 years to live in Finland, away from his country, family, friends, and everything that meant so much to him. And so I thanked the President. I said, but I'm not going to be able to accept that deployment because it would not work for me from a personal point of view.
Yeah. Did the President at any stage indicate to you whether he was...
Mr. Makwana, I am just reflecting on the fact that you are the one who read to the witness that very important paragraph.
Yes.
I would have liked the witness to tell us about that very important meeting
Yes.
between herself, the former president, and Mr. Gordhan herself. I would like to hear. Could you please just tell us about that meeting?
Yes.
No.
I was invited, I received a phone call that Sunday, the 31st of October, in the afternoon, from the President's office to say that the President urgently needed to see me at his home, the official residence in Pretoria. I knew then that I was going to be dismissed.
Sorry, just repeat that. You knew then that you were to be dismissed?
Yes, the rumors and everything.
Oh.
The President never really called me to any urgent meeting. There was... and bear in mind...
I guess what you are saying is you had a strong suspicion.
Strong suspicion.
Yes, yeah.
Bear in mind that I had attempted to put this Transnet Cabinet memorandum before Cabinet. I'd requested special permission from the President a few days before, requesting the permission to jump the subcommittee process and take it straight, and heard nothing. And that never appeared on the agenda. Also, on that last cabinet meeting that I attended, what was on the agenda was the Safcol, the recommendations around the board and chair of Safcol. And I received a letter from the minister in the presidency, the late Minister Colin Shabani, saying that the president was requesting me to remove that item from the agenda, even though it was at the cabinet meeting and it had gone through the subcommittee process. And I declined, and I said, you know, we can't stop processes of appointment. And then I received a letter from, and I have copies of that, from Mr. Shabani saying, in view of what you have said, the president says you should go ahead with this cabinet memorandum. So that was discussed and agreed at cabinet. But I was surprised that the president took such a strong interest in Safcol. Safcol was one of the smallest of the state-owned enterprises. I think it had the lowest revenue base. And so it did confuse me why he would want to have his own say on that. So anyway, so that was a couple of days before, and all of that had happened then. And there'd been a lot of rumors, and the deputy minister had come to my office. And he said the rumors that he's hearing in Luthuli House is that I was going to be dismissed. And we discussed how I would handle it. And he said I should do as dignified an exit, and I said I agree. Okay. So I was summoned to the president. So I had a fair idea that I was going to be dismissed. Mr. Kathrada insisted that he accompany me in the car, and he was not invited into the president's residence, and he did not expect to be part of the meeting, and he was left sitting outside in the car. I then met with the president and Mr. Mantashe, and the president said that the NEC had decided that I ought to be redeployed as the ambassador to Finland, and then I said, you know, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. But I did say at that stage that I want to thank the president for the privilege of being able to serve my country as a cabinet minister, and I mean that. Any person who can serve your country as high a level as that, it's a privilege and it's an honor to do it. I didn't ask the reasons. For me, it was perfectly, you know, the president has the prerogative to dismiss. I also said that I was not going to go back to Parliament. The reason being that when I was made a minister, Mr. Kathrada, who had been staying in Cape Town at that time, moved back to Johannesburg, where his foundation was based, where his comrades, where his friends, family, a lot of people were based. And going back to Parliament, in the 2 years that I was a cabinet minister, Cassie was a lot of the time on his own because I had to be down in Cape Town. And I just felt it would be unkind and not fair because he had been perfectly accommodating to me when I had to be a minister, for me now to expect him to now pack up and move back to Cape Town. And I'd done my stint in Parliament. I'd been a parliamentarian from 1994 to 2008, and I think there was time for young blood to come in, and it was only, I thought there was nothing more I could contribute there. It wasn't in an active peak at all that I said I didn't want to go to Parliament. With that...
I'm sorry, I hear you say up to 2008. I'm assuming that when you were a minister, you remained a member of Parliament, or is that not so?
Yes, as a minister, yes. So 2010, you're right. I've done longer service than I credit myself with. And Then there was silence, and I said, is that all, And they said yes. And so I greeted them, and I left. The president helped me to open the door because the door was jammed, and I left, and I went home with Kathy, and we went to my sister, and her husband, who has stood by me all these years. When I was in prison, she was a rock that I leant on. And
so
I went
the dismissal was with immediate effect?
My sister was
I'm sorry. The dismissal, was it with immediate effect?
With immediate effect. Obviously what happens is that you are dismissed, but it's only when the new minister is sworn in that in effect there's a transfer. So after explaining this to my sister and watching the television, in which it was portrayed that the president, from the presidency, it was portrayed that those of us who were being reshuffled, because I was not the only one, were being reshuffled because we were incompetent. And there was a whole narrative around that. Anyway.
Was that based on any media statement issued by the presidency?
There was a media statement that was released, yes.
Oh, it's not that the media was interpreting it in a certain way.
Yeah, and it wasn't a thing, they are incompetent, but the innuendo was certainly that the president wanted, good professional people and whatever. I then spent the whole night clearing my office at home, because you have to take back documents. And I went back to the office in the morning and organized my office, handed over all the documents to be filed, and requested that my secretary and whatever organize a handover meeting for me, because it had been announced that Minister Gigaba was taking over, so that I could hand over to him. I then left. Mr. Gigaba hadn't yet come to the office. I then left, and I was told the next day that Mr. Gigaba declined a meeting with me.
Before you go to the next day, have you now completed the events of the 31st of October 2010?
Yes, and the 1st of November.
Oh, yes. That's what the chairperson wanted to hear from you, from your own mouth, as to what transpired on that day. May I inquire from you that prior to the 31st of October 2010, did the president express or indicate to you in any form that he was not happy with your performance as the Minister of Public Enterprises?
No, he didn't. The president at a certain stage did assign certain very heavy responsibility on me. He made me the minister to coordinate the drawing up, the drafting and consolidation of government's energy plan going forward. Now, I don't know, there is a Minister of Energy, and I did say at Cabinet that I'm honored to be given this job, but there is also a Minister of Energy and whatever, but I was told very firmly by the President. And we successfully introduced and had passed with a fair amount of approval, because I engaged with civil society and a lot of players on this plan. I also signed a performance agreement with the President. I think it was in April 2010. The President's office signed performance agreements with every minister. And on that basis, the President would be able to evaluate your performance at regular intervals. I was never evaluated on the basis of my performance in terms of that agreement.
Yes. Were there any complaints which were made against you by any of the boards which were falling under your portfolio during that time or even prior to that?
No.
You said that the president never expressed any unhappiness with your performance. But of course, based on the evidence you gave yesterday, it must have been quite clear. It's quite clear that there were very sharp differences of opinion between yourself and the president in regard to some of the issues in your portfolio.
Yes, correct. So, I was aware that we often had differences of opinion, but he never called me in and said, I want to talk to you about these matters, I'm not happy, or the way that you are performing in the department as a minister. No. I never got that kind of feedback from him.
Is there room, you can just answer this question to the best of your ability, do you think there may be room for any suggestion that maybe your personality and his personality, your respective ways of dealing with issues were such that the kinds of differences that came up maybe were likely to come up? Or is that something you have not thought about? I'm just thinking because the differences of opinion were quite sharp, I think, on certain issues, and I think they were expressed forcefully on both sides. You must just tell me if what I'm thinking you don't agree with, and feel free to say you think differently. I'm just exploring thoughts.
The president is a genial person, we know that. I cannot put aside the fact that probably dealing with a woman who held views might have been an uncomfortable experience for him. But I was careful to be respectful all the way through. At times we did butt heads. And yes, we are two very different kinds of people. But I think those who have worked with me have found that whilst I am firm on certain principles, I'm also very open to discussion and other points of view. And the fact that the president just was not working from the same set of values that I was working from, probably contributed to the breakdown in that relationship.
Okay, now thank you very much.
Thanks.
You may continue.
Ms. Hogan, a question may be posed to say that, but you were not dismissed. You were in fact offered a post in Finland. Why would you say that, that equates to a dismissal?
Well, I was dismissed as a cabinet minister and offered a redeployment as an ambassador. So yes, I was dismissed as a cabinet minister.
Now, you said who took over from you? Who took over?
Minister Malusi Gigaba.
Did Minister Gigaba recommend a new board to be appointed?
Well, Minister
After your departure?
Yes. The Transnet cabinet memorandum that I had proposed to go before cabinet in early November, and by which time I had already been dismissed, that was withdrawn from the cabinet process. And it must have been about 2 weeks later, at the next cabinet meeting, Minister Gigaba put forward proposals for Transnet board, which was approved. Some of the people who I'd recommended in my document, he had incorporated onto that board, some of them not.
I'm sorry, Mr. Makwana. I may have missed something. The last communication that I just want to go back to prior to the dismissal before we go to what happened after your successor took over. I just want to go back to events that may have preceded your dismissal as cabinet minister. Now, I think the last letter which I think was
Annexure L, Mr. Chair,
was 28th September, isn't it? Was dated, which you wrote
yes,
to the president.
The last letter I sent to the president was actually the 27th of October.
Okay, let me just get there. Mr. Makwana,
I'm not sure if it's in this
page
pack.
366.
Page 366.
No, that is the September one. Sorry, I sent a letter to the president requesting that the Transnet memo be expedited and placed on the cabinet agenda for the 15th of September. For the November one, sorry. It's complicated. I sent a letter to the presidency on the 27th of October requesting his assistance to expedite the placing of the Transnet cabinet memo onto the cabinet agenda. That was for November. The cabinet was meeting shortly in November.
Yes, yes.
And then 4 days later, he fired me.
Yes.
I don't have that letter.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. You might have planned to deal with this differently, but I would rather let us deal with it now. Events such as the Moraga incident, have you dealt with them?
They are the ones that we are just about to canvass with the witness after the Transnet.
Yeah. No, I think they should come before the dismissal because they reflect the disagreements between the minister and the president in relation to certain people occupying certain positions. I would like to hear those prior to us getting to what happened after her successor took over. So I would like to hear about those, and I don't know if she has said enough about Safcol, and I don't know whether the Mumbai one was adequately dealt with as well. I would like all of those prior to the dismissal because I think that's where they fit in properly.
Mr. Chair, yes, we had structured the evidence differently, but we appreciate your point.
Yeah.
What we intended to do was to deal first with all the relevant issues pertaining to Transnet, so that you must be able to equate them with what now transpires at Eskom, and thereafter we deal with Safcol, and we deal with the question of the Mumbai road, so that at least the evidence must be led in that structured manner for us to be able to follow and for her to be able to follow. But we are easy.
Yeah,
we will be able to...
I think that if you have regard to the terms of reference that we are dealing with, dismissals and appointments of members of the executive, what our terms of reference require is what were these dismissals about? What were these appointments about? And in regard to her statement reflects certain sharp differences between herself and the former president in relation to a number of entities and not just one. Therefore, I think it makes sense to canvass all of those differences of opinion between herself and the former president leading up to the dismissal.
We appreciate that, Chair. We can do that.
Okay.
Let's now jump and deal with the Eskom issues to link them with your evidence. You preface those issues by referring to an Eskom board.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to complete the picture just so that you understand, you appreciate where I'm coming from. Because it may well be that the dismissal, her dismissal, was not just about her differences of opinion with the former president in regard to Transnet. It may be that it was as a result of the many differences of opinion which arose in regard to the various state-owned enterprises. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hogan?
Yes.
You are dealing with the issues of Eskom, and you preface them by referring to a breakaway board session which was held on the 28th of October, 2009. Am I correct?
Correct.
Can you share with the chair what transpired in that session and what you were told occurred in relation to Mr. Moraga?
Chair, on the 28th of October, the board was having a breakaway session to discuss a strategy going forward, as is normal with boards. And bearing in mind that Eskom was facing huge challenges both from a funding point of view and an operational point of view. I hesitate to use that word that I used yesterday that blacked out the lights, but the lights, certainly the operational challenges around providing a reliable system, reliable energy was certainly uppermost in all the board's mind. A very tense discussion ensued, and it was very robust. And in that process, the CEO of Eskom, Mr. Moraga, got up and said that he, if this was the case, he was going to resign, that he was resigning, and he left the board and he left the room and said the board must make its decisions. At that point, the chair of the board, Mr. Bobby Gotzel, said, well, if that is the case, because there has been conflict between us at this meeting, myself and him, strong differences of opinion, I too will stand up and leave, and then the board must make a decision.
I just want to confirm that what you are relating in regard to what happened at that meeting of the board is based on reports that you received. You yourself were not there?
I was not present.
Yes, okay.
And later court cases and whatever.
Okay.
Now, this is a very difficult situation. You've got a CEO, who's about to resign of the most important state-owned enterprise. Anyway, the board then, to move matters on, the board then unanimously agreed that they would accept Mr. Moraga's resignation, and there were grounds for that. It wasn't just what had happened at that meeting. And Mr. Gotzel, and of course, a delegation from the board was then dispatched to meet with Mr. Moraga to inform him of the decision and to look at the modalities of his departure. And he met with them, and was informed, and there was an agreement that they would meet in the morning to discuss the modalities of his departure. I was informed by Mr. Gotzel that this had taken place. I was down in Cape Town, I flew up, and I immediately, the next day, went to the Eskom head office and was being briefed by Mr. Gotzel when Mr. Moraga walked in with a letter which he gave to me and had given to the chair, saying that he had in fact not offered to resign.
And that is now the Friday, the 29th of October, 2009, when you say that you flew down and went to Eskom's offices, and that's where you got a detailed briefing about what transpired.
Yes.
And at that moment, you say that Mr. Moraga then
came into the office and he said that it was not true, and it's the annexure here, yes, that that was the letter that I was given, that he was not accepting that he had resigned. He had not resigned.
May I refer you to page 368? Mr. Chair, that is Annexure M, which the witness is referring to. Ms. Hogan, is that the letter that you say that you were finished with by Mr. Moraga on the 29th of October?
Correct.
May I just take you a few steps back? From your own personal knowledge, prior to these events happening at this particular meeting of the board of Eskom, were you aware whether there were any challenges or strong differences between the chairperson of the board, Mr. Bobby Gotzel, and the then chief executive officer of Eskom, Mr. Moraga, that may have been making it difficult for the two of them to work together, or for the board to work smoothly with the executive, or was this coming to you as a complete surprise?
I'm trying to recollect now.
But if you can't remember, it's fine.
I was not intimately involved with understanding the tensions. It had been kept in-house. I do know that when Mr. Moraga came into the office and handed over the letter, where Mr. Gotzel and I were present, that they proceeded to have a very, very harsh interaction. And it was then that I perceived just how difficult that relationship was. But one of the things that alerted me, which, you know, as a minister, you just put it in the back of your head, was that one of the senior black managers at Eskom, I'd been at Eskom, and I'd just heard that he was resigning, and we saw each other in the lift, or, you know, some place. I didn't ask to see him or anything. It was just per chance. And I said, I'm very sorry that you're leaving. And he said to me, if you don't sort out the CEO, a lot of us, or, you know, a lot more are going to leave. And that quite shocked me. But, you know, all through this period, when this happened, I wasn't quite aware of the intensities of the conflicts and whatever. It came to me fairly new. I'd only been a minister for about 4 or 5 months when this all blew up. Yeah, so you are correct. In a sense, I wasn't fully appraised.
Okay, all right. You may proceed.
Yes. Now you received the letter, Annexure M. What did you do?
This was...
I'm sorry. Do you want her to tell us the main important points made in the letter?
Yes, the letter was written the next day by Mr. Moraga, and basically he was saying This is a matter of national importance. My remarks of frustration cannot be construed as an offer to resign. The chairman has expressed similar frustrations numerous times and has not been treated in this manner. I was stunned by the response of the board to say they accept my offer, and then he goes on to say what he thought the real issues were.
Feel free to read the letter if you can't remember the points. Feel free to read the letter.
He gave this letter, and he had given it, I think, to members of the board as well. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but it was to me and to Mr. Gotzel. I got the letter in the office, yes.
Yes, the chair was saying that you are at liberty to read
Oh, I must read. Oh,
the
sorry.
letter.
Yes,
that you
I
can
think the-
Sorry, okay.
The letter reflects, at least, maybe reflecting at least Mr. Moraga's view of why there were the events that had happened. So I think it's important to just
Okay.
read what he says.
So the letter is addressed to the Eskom board and not to myself. And it says, "Dear board members, I've reflected on this matter overnight. I believe this is a matter of national importance. This matter is about the role of the SOEs in this phase of the democracy. It is about the future of this country. It is not about the relationship between the chairman and the chief executive. My remarks of frustration in the board meeting can in no way be construed to be an offer to resign. The chairman has expressed similar frustrations numerous times and has not been treated in this manner. I was stunned by the response of the board to say they accept my offer and wish to communicate with the following immediate effect. The real issues are the following. I have put before the board a very comprehensive strategy document about the direction I propose Eskom should take. The strategy articulates very key matters of national importance relating to our contribution to this developing democracy. I am of the firm view that the board must engage on the matters articulated in the strategy document, as this is the most important duty of the board. The real issues between the chairman and myself are rooted in the differences on the role of Eskom in this phase of our democracy and the role clarity between the chairman and the chief executive. I believe as a board, we will be failing the country if we do not show leadership on this matter. Conclusion. I have not offered to resign, and I'm not offering to resign. I believe the role of Eskom is key to the development of our country during this phase of the democracy. It is a view I believe strongly in and a view I'm willing to fight for whatever the consequences. Yours sincerely, Mr. Moraga, and it is CC to myself and Minister Dipuo Peters.
Now you received that letter. At that time, you're still at the offices of Eskom. Did you engage with the board members to then try to interrogate that here is Mr. Moraga telling me something different from what was conveyed to me?
The board was still was present at the Eskom offices because this was more than a one-day board meeting. And I was aware that they were sitting in the boardroom next door. So when I got this letter and I heard the fierce interchange between the chair and the CEO, I thought I wanted to consult with the board to get their view. So I went to the board. I asked Moraga not to be present because I wanted the board to be able to express their views as the board itself. And I said at the preface, I said, I'm going to ask each and every one of the board members to give me their view on what happened and whether Mr. Moraga had indeed offered to resign and whether that of the board's view had been communicated to him and what their view was, had he resigned. And I did say that if there is any person sitting here who has a different view to another board member, they must express that different view. There will be no repercussions for that, but I want an honest account from all those board members. I went round the board and each board member confirmed that Mr. Moraga had offered to resign, that they discussed it, that they felt that they will accept that resignation. And the board, there was a fair amount of anger within the board itself. And some board members were more frank and said that they felt that he was not performing to par as a CEO. So I then left the boardroom and I had also requested that the head of the legal department in my department come to head office, plus my advisor, my ministerial advisor. And I asked them to bring in a senior counsel because I wanted legal guidance, because this is a tricky matter. And Michael Katz was called in. I consulted with him. I consulted with my deputy minister and with my legal advisor and my political advisor. Both the deputy minister and myself were of the view that the relationship between Mr. Moraga and the board had deteriorated very significantly, and that this final denial that he had resigned was a final nail in the coffin, as it were. I did not want to get involved in this matter as a minister, but I did feel that we needed to get a very quick solution. So then I requested my deputy minister, who does not have my executive authority, but my deputy minister, who is an exceptionally, who is able to engage very well with people.
Who was a deputy minister?
Minister Enoch Gordhan. I asked him to meet with Mr. Moraga and say, listen, is there not an elegant way of dealing with this? It's clear the relationship has broken down.
Just one second. When you were listening to board members give you their accounts of what had happened, was your deputy minister with you or not really?
I cannot recall. I think he was. I can't recall.
You can't recall.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But, you know, he and I worked very closely together. And
if he wasn't there, I assume
he would have been
you would
briefed
have
afterwards.
briefed him
Yeah.
before asking him to speak to Mr.
Oh,
Moraga.
definitely.
Yes.
And he was part of the discussions with senior counsel. We spent quite a long time discussing all of the ins and outs of this. And so I was just simply trying to facilitate a process, but not to instruct the board or to take sides in this matter. But I wanted the deputy minister to convey that, you know, there was almost what one calls an irretrievable breakdown in the relationship between the board and Mr. Moraga. The deputy minister then went ahead, I think arranged to meet with him. There's some confusion how often he met. In the court papers there are differences. But anyway, Mr. Moraga, I was told that Mr. Moraga would like to think about that. The deputy minister proposed to him saying, let's not make a big public event out of this. Let's find a dignified way for you to move on. Let's talk about the modalities of your exit. And let me say up front, I have never ever had any reason to believe that Mr. Moraga was in any way corrupt. He was a very fine engineer. And it has always been regrettable for me that, you know, the turn of events that finally took place did take place. Because he was not one of those people who was just there for himself. He truly wanted to serve the country in his capacity. So I wanted a dignified exit, for him to consider a dignified exit, to both help the board and to stop this whole thing from blowing out of control. Eskom was in too vulnerable a position to afford this kind of confrontation.
Yes. Now, did Mr. Moraga accept, did he accept that he must, exit the Eskom as you had proposed or as the deputy has proposed?
He said that he had to attend a family funeral in Limpopo and he would come back after that to meet, and he would like to think it through.
Did he come back?
The deputy minister met with him again, which is my understanding, and he said he did not want to talk to the deputy minister. He wanted to speak to the minister.
This would have been
On the
date
Monday.
now? The meeting of the board, was it on the 29th or did it start on the 28th?
It was on Friday. It was on the Thursday. Oh, wait. The meeting of the board was on the 28th.
Yeah.
The
And
29th was when
letter.
I spoke to the board. The 30th was the Friday when Mr. Gordhan spoke to him. And then it was the weekend. And then Mr. Gordhan met with him on the Monday. And he said that he would like to meet with me, not with the deputy minister.
And Monday would have been what date?
That would have been the 31st. That would have been the 2nd of November.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Based on what we know in terms of when you were dismissed, it would have been after you had been dismissed.
Yes.
Okay.
It would have been, well, you see, what had happened in the interim was the board was getting extremely edgy. They were not willing, and I perfectly understood that, to allow this process to go on and on all the time. I think they were uncertain what position I was going to take. And they were wanting to ensure that no incorrect political interference happened. And they're correct on that. So I had a few engagements telephonically with the chair of the board, who was conveying to me the sentiment of board members. And I was saying to the chair, I fully understand that sentiment, but we do need to try and have as dignified an exit and as unproblematic an exit, because this can affect the reputation of Eskom. The board, as I understood in later testimony into court and whatever, the board took legal opinion on this from senior counsel, who informed them that they have the authority to dismiss or to accept or whatever. So the board then sent a letter, which I wasn't aware of at the time, saying that they've accepted his resignation, and even if that resignation does not hold as accepted, on the basis, and I forget the exact words, but on the basis of...
You are dealing with that on paragraph 70? 70. Paragraph 70 on
yes.
page 16.
And stating that incapacity as a manager constituted further grounds for terminating the relationship should the resignation dispute not be settled. Now, I had concerns about that second aspect of the letter, because I had concerns about due process. If you are going to dismiss someone on the grounds of due process, then due process must occur. I then instructed my head of my legal department to engage with the chair of Eskom on this matter, to hear their views, and they put forward opinion from their senior counsel that what they had done was in accordance with the opinion that they had received. So when I met with Mr. Moraga, I still had not sight of that letter. Mr. Moraga actually showed me the letter or informed me of its contents.
In terms of your statement, just to assist the chair with the chronology, you said that you met with Mr. Moraga on the 4th of November,
Yes.
2009.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that is in terms of your paragraph 71. You can talk to it.
So then...
I'm sorry. So is this 2009 or 2010 that
This
we're
is
talking?
2009.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I just put the Gama
that-
story down, and now I had another
Okay.
story.
Then I think I was mistaken, and I think you were mistaken too, because you went along when I said the 2nd of November. I don't know what Mr. Moraga was going to have done. I said you would have been dismissed by then because of what you have said.
Yes.
But actually, if it was 2009,
Yes.
you were still minister in
Yes.
November.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so
Sorry. I confused matters.
Yeah, okay.
That is the reason why I'm highlighting this date.
Yes, no, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we are talking
Too
about
much detail for this old
September,
man.
October 2009.
Yes,
November
yeah.
2009. Okay.
2009 was a hard year. So I then met with Mr. Moraga.
On the 4th of November 2009, yes.
Yes. I met with him at South African Airways gave us a facility. I wanted to meet with him off-site, privately. And we spent about 4.5 hours in a meeting. And he was insistent that I, as a minister, must exercise my leadership. Now, that was being echoed already outside when the Youth League was shouting that there should be leadership. The chair of the portfolio committee would later in those days talk about the minister must exercise her leadership.
Was that being said at that time in relation to the Eskom issue or just in general?
The Eskom issue. The Eskom issue. And Mr. Moraga's issue. And I made it clear to him, and I wasn't being harsh, but I said it is not on my authority to intervene in this matter. It's a matter for corporate governance. And that is why I am trying from behind the scenes to resolve this matter. I said that I was surprised at that letter and that I would ask my department to look at the second part of that letter from Transnet around, and if the view was that it was incorrect, I'd ask Eskom to rescind that part of the letter. But he was absolutely, I can say, arrogant and saying, Minister, you must exercise your authority, your leadership. You must affirm that I am the CEO. I said to him, look, we can set in a process of mediation on this matter. He said, no, I'm not interested. You must exercise your leadership. I offered him arbitration. He said, no, you must exercise your leadership. At the end of that,
What was your understanding of what he was meaning by insisting that you must exercise your leadership?
that I must exercise my executive authority to confirm that he had not resigned and to confirm him in the position as CEO of Eskom.
In other words, to resolve or decide the dispute between himself and the board about whether he had offered or not offered to resign.
Yeah, he was insistent that he remained the CEO, and he wanted me simply to affirm that he was the CEO of Eskom. We spent nearly 4.5 hours there. My legal advisor was next door and the deputy minister, because he only wanted to speak to me on his own. And, finally I had to say to him, I have offered you a dignified exit. I have offered you mediation. I have offered arbitration. Beyond that, I cannot go. And we then finished the meeting. I contacted the chair. The chair of the board had been quite anxious about my meeting with Mr. Moraga, but I did say I needed to hear him out. But they had already issued that letter without my knowing at that point.
The letter that you are referring to is where the board has confirmed
that he'd resigned, that they'd accepted his resignation, and if that was not held to be a resignation, it was on the basis of incapacity. I then contacted the chairman of the board and told him what had taken place, that I had not been able to have any effect on the process, and that, in my opinion, the board had to do whatever the board saw fit and how they were advised to do. President Zuma was not in the country at that time. He was abroad.
Who was acting?
The Deputy President Motlanthe. The next morning, I went and I briefed President Motlanthe about everything that had taken place. I also briefed him about my concern and unease about the particular letter, but I briefed him that the board was now going to go ahead with whatever processes, because I had withdrawn as trying to facilitate a resolution on the matter.
And what was the reaction of President Motlanthe?
President Motlanthe, you just said, you need to do what you need to do here. He didn't try to intervene. There was the board and the chairperson had called a meeting of all the senior management at Eskom headquarters the next day.
Would that have been the 5th of November then? Your meeting with Mr. Moraga was 4.
A mistake. There seems to be a mistake here in my affidavit. It says the 4th, but I believe it was the 5th. I'd have to double check that.
Are you referring to paragraph 72?
Yes.
So that you can check that, but according to you, it was the next day, it must have been the 5th.
Yeah. I think it was that. We must just check that.
If you go to paragraph 73, you are now talking about that meeting which was called by the chairperson.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Would that meeting have been on the 5th or the 6th?
That meeting must have been on the 5th.
Was it after you have briefed President Motlanthe, a day after you have briefed President Motlanthe, or the same day?
Same day.
Same day, oh yes.
Yeah.
All right, tell us about that meeting, which was called by the chairperson of Eskom.
And the chair had announced that Mr. Moraga had resigned. In the media, this had become a big issue. And it was not good for Eskom. Had Mr. Moraga resigned, had he not resigned? What was going on? Why is the minister not confirming, not confirming? It was becoming a bit of a political football out there. And so the media was invited to a press conference immediately after the informing senior management. So they were out in full force to hear what the chair of Eskom had to say, to clarify what the status, what the position was.
Ms. Hogan, before you go into the details of what transpired in that meeting, Mr. Chair, I'm told by Mr. Pretorius, who appears to be very thirsty, that it's now 11:15.
sorry. It is 11:15. We'll take the short adjournment and resume at 11:30. Thank you.
shouting at me. And he said, what do you think you're doing? Saying a little bit stronger. And I said, what? He said, Moraga, you've got to stop it. Tell them that they've got to stop now. And I said, but President, they...
I'm sorry, just go back to that sentence. Tell who to stop
the board,
that?
that they must stop now.
Oh, okay.
I tried, to speak, to reason, to find out what it was all about. He said, I don't have time. I'm in transit through the country. I'm on my way to Mozambique. You can call me, like in half an hour's time or whatever, and we can discuss further. I tried to phone him, and he just never answered my calls.
When you say him, you're referring to the president, the ex-president?
Yes.
Yes.
I informed, that was the ex-president, yes.
This was still on 5 November?
Yes. This was as the processes were unfolding in Eskom. I spoke to the deputy president, who was the acting president at the time. And I said, I've been given an instruction from a president of the country to stop a process. And short of just defying him, I'm bound to it was a very confusing situation. I think it's very difficult when a president just issues an instruction. And I didn't have any knowledge if the president had any further matters which he could not disclose with me, that, I had no insight into why this instruction was being issued. So I phoned Mr. Gotzel, and I said to him, I've just received this call from the president, and he's saying that this process must be stopped. And Mr. Gotzel said, but we're in the midst of the process. I've just informed the senior management. We're shortly going to go before the media. What do I say? And I said, I honestly don't understand it. And he said, well, if this is the president's giving this instruction, we can't ignore it. So he then cancelled the media briefing.
Yes. Were you able to arrange the meeting with the president in order to address these issues surrounding Mr. Moraga?
Well, it was... Then everything went absolutely ballistic. From Parliament to every commentator, it became the story of the day. Who is it? This is Eskom. Who is the CEO? Who isn't the CEO? Why are we called to a press briefing? Why is the minister not informing us who is the CEO? Why is the board quiet? It was a complete and utter nightmare and should never have taken place. I requested to see the president, and finally I was told that I could meet with him on the morning of Friday, the 6th of November, at his official residence. He gave me 10 minutes there. He said he hasn't got time. He's going to a meeting, NEC meeting or something, and he will meet with me at lunchtime.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hogan. Is it correct that at the time that the former president gave you that instruction, Deputy President Motlanthe was acting president? Is that correct?
That is correct. And that places anyone in a dilemma, because actually the president of the country is President Motlanthe at that time, as an acting president. And, it threw me, it threw the board, it threw all of us into dilemmas where you did not want to be disrespectful to a president. But the issues were so profound from a constitutional point of view that you didn't have time to even think this through.
Yes, you are still relating the 10 minutes that you were offered by the president in the meeting of the 6th of November. Did you discuss all the issues that you wanted to discuss with the president?
The president merely said that, that he would meet with me for a fuller meeting at lunchtime.
I'm sorry. I've just been given a note by my registrar that when we started, the person who is in charge of the transcript wasn't in his place, and that there was no recording happening until he walked in. I suspect that that means there is some evidence that was lost, but I suggest that what we do is we proceed, and then at a certain stage, somebody must listen to the evidence as recorded and see what we may have lost, and then we can cover it later on. Would that be fine, Mr. Makwana?
That would be fine, Mr. President.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I did indicate to Ms. Hogan that she's very strong. Since she has commenced her evidence, either we get the lights out or the chair gets stuck in the lift, and now is the transcription. She must be very powerful.
I'm one crisis of energy.
I don't think that she'll take responsibility for all of those things. Okay, thank you. Let's proceed.
Yes, and then did you finally meet with the president?
Again.
Yes, when I met with the president at breakfast.
I'm sorry again. You talked about the lights going out yesterday, but I do feel like there is no echo now. I don't know whether everybody feels it seems to be quite warm.
That is the fourth reason why I'm saying that she's very powerful.
Those who, the relevant technicians should attend to that, but we don't want too much, we don't want it to be too cold, please. Okay, all right, thank you. Let's proceed.
So I had a 10-minute slot with the president at his official residence. He said he couldn't meet with me longer, and that he would meet with me at lunchtime, during the NEC meeting or whatever it was that he was attending in Kempton Park. I then went to Kempton Park, and I got no call to see the president at all. And it really was very bad, because that was the only story that was really out there in the public domain. And the consequences for Eskom, ratings agencies, not that we are governed by them, but, this is a company that was facing real financial constraints. It didn't need this kind of turmoil.
Did you finally meet the president?
Yes. I was, I registered my disapproval with Jesse Duarte, who was in the president's office, and various people that I wasn't getting to see him, and it was urgent. So finally on the Sunday I met with him at lunchtime, and he said, this is the deal.
That would have been what date now? Sunday?
Sunday the 8th.
The 8th of November, 2009.
Yeah, 2009. And I met with him, and he said, this is the deal. He said, I will confirm Moraga back as the CEO. He will come back to his office and he will then write his story and the board will write their story, and then I, as a minister, will determine the merits of each case.
And how did you react to that?
So the approach of the former president was, let Mr. Moraga write his version about this issue of him offering to resign, allegedly, and let the board write their version on the issue of Mr. Moraga allegedly offering his resignation. And then you, as the minister in charge of public enterprises, would look at the two versions and decide. That's what he was saying to you?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I was not happy with that. And I explained my concerns about that it didn't really advance us much further, and, you know, how could I adjudicate something like that? But I said, if that was the president's view, I was not going to convey that as my view to the board or to Mr. Moraga. If the president wanted that kind of instruction, he himself should take ownership of that instruction. Bear in mind, I was mindful of just the executive authority of a minister, of a president, and I felt under these circumstances, I could not assume responsibility for an act which I felt fell out of the purview of my executive authority. So the president agreed. So we agreed that I would speak to the board, who was sitting waiting to meet with me at a hotel in Johannesburg, and I would convey it as a president's decision, not my decision, and he would meet with Mr. Moraga.
Yes.
So when you said to him that you would want him to take ownership of the proposal that he was making, what you meant was that you didn't want to go to Mr. Moraga and the board and put this as your proposal.
Yes.
You wanted to be able to tell Mr. Moraga and the board that this is the proposal from the president, or instruction, whatever it was.
Yes, because, you know, I would be implicating myself in terms of that instruction, because I felt that instruction was invalid in terms of my powers and authority. I could not just issue a thing saying, Mr. Moraga comes back, this gets what done, whatever. It would really be interfering with a board process and a process of a CEO.
Yes, flowing from that answer, on paragraph 77, line number 2, you say that he really, meaning that the president, he really did not want to discuss anything. He just informed me that he had decided that Mr. Moraga will return to Eskom over a period of time. And then you proceed with the lines in which you have now discussed with the chair. But what I want to know is that at the time when the president told you that, was he aware that the board had already decided and accepted Mr. Moraga's
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, he was completely aware of that.
Let's go back just a step to what Mr. Makwana just read from your statement to you. Can I hear that coming from you? Can you just speak naturally, that exchange?
I met with the president at the venue in which he was, at which the meeting was taking place, and he just sat down and he said, "This is the deal." You know, I was wanting to discuss the merits. You know, I wanted to understand why he had issued an instruction that the process must be halted. he was just wanting to discuss the deal.
Now, part of the reason why I said I wanted to hear that coming from you is that from what Mr. Makwana read, it appears that you say in the statement that he said, "I've decided." So you hadn't put it that way.
Yeah.
So I want to know if that's what he said, "I've decided."
Yes.
This is the deal.
Yeah, he just informed me, this is the deal.
Okay, all right, continue.
What the chairperson is trying to get out of your mouth is not that this is the deal. What exactly did the president say to you? Did he say to you that I have decided Mr. Moraga will come back, or did he simply say that this is the deal?
Well, he informed me that this is the deal. That's what I understand, this is his decision.
And you see, some of the things you might have a different appreciation of them, and we as lawyers and judges might have
okay.
different, understandings of them, and sometimes you might not understand why we particularly want to hear certain aspects. But one of the issues that arise is whether what he put to you was put to you as subject to Mr. Moraga and the board accepting the proposal, or it was put to you as, that's it. Take it or leave. They must take it or leave it. I want to understand whether this was a proposal, or this was take it or leave it. Or there might not have been enough time to understand those nuances.
I wasn't sure, but the fact that we had agreed that I would inform the board and he would inform Mr. Moraga probably leads me to believe that this hadn't been discussed beforehand, and he was first informing me, but this was what he wanted done.
And you told the president that he must take ownership of that proposal, and what then happened?
He was happy to do that, and we agreed that I would inform the board, but inform them that it was his instructions, and that he would call Mr. Moraga and inform Mr. Moraga.
Did you meet with the board?
Yes, I met with the board later that afternoon.
And what was the board's reaction to that?
The board was...
And I'm sorry, maybe before you tell us about the board, you said that you had difficulties with playing the role that the president was proposing you should play in the resolution of the dispute. And you said that was because of your awareness of your executive authority and so on. Can you please elaborate more on that before we get to hear what the board said?
In terms of corporate governance in a company, the relationship between the CEO and the board is one of accountability. And as a minister, as a shareholder, it is, the corporate governance framework does not allow the shareholder now to intervene in that relationship, and you can try and mediate and sort out things, but you can't make a decision about what must now take place. And I felt that the president was trying to put me in a position where I would now give an instruction which I knew the board absolutely did not agree with, and that I was forcing a board to take on a decision which they had made very clear to me that they were not happy with. So I said to I conveyed this to the president, you can't interrupt, a process. And I said, if that be the case, then this must be seen to be a presidential instruction, not my instruction. And he agreed.
I would imagine, and you must just tell me what you think, I would imagine that how strongly the board felt about the correctness of their view and how strongly Mr. Moraga may have felt about the correctness of his view should not have been a factor on whether or not you should play that role. I'm mentioning that, and you must just give me your comment. I'm mentioning that because isn't the position that when you are in a leadership position, you have to take sometimes decisions that people will be unhappy with. Assuming you had, it's a role that in law you could play.
Assuming that it was a role in the law that I could play, I did play that. I met with Mr. Moraga. I asked my deputy minister to meet with him. I spent hours and hours with him. I offered him mediation. I offered him arbitration. He was insisting that I affirm that he is the CEO, and that I could not do. Because the board had informed me, each individual board member had informed me that that was not the case. And it would be very indelicate of me to have then intervened in a process of saying, no, Mr. Moraga is still the CEO. Despite what you told me, he is still the CEO.
If legally you had the authority to play that role, are you saying that you would still not want to play that role just because the board felt strongly and you might have to make a finding that they would be unhappy about?
It's a hypothetical situation that you're posing to me.
I think
you know, from a corporate governance point of view, when a relationship between a board and a CEO has broken down irretrievably, as I was a witness to, the shareholder, I think, would seldom want to intervene and tell the board, this must happen even though you're not happy with it. It wouldn't have a good outcome for the company from a fiduciary point of view to impose someone that the board felt they did no longer have the confidence in. So hypothetically, I was never presented with that situation, but hypothetically, after having consulted each individual board member and ascertained their views, I would have been reluctant to have moved in there and said, this is how it goes, because what I could see down the line is that Eskom, in trying to resolve the immense operational and financial problems that were facing them, that these would continually be a site of contestation, given the lack of a harmonious relationship at that time. So I didn't think it was solving the problem. The problem had to be resolved satisfactorily, not in a way of just insisting this and nothing else.
Your preference was that that dispute be resolved by an outsider, a mediator, arbitrator?
Well, my preference was that the matter should have been resolved satisfactorily when it arose between the board and the CEO. When the CEO contested that, I then had suggested various deadlock-breaking mechanisms that are available in terms of the Labour Relations Act and whatever, mediation, all sorts of things to try and sort that out. But Mr. Moraga simply would not go along with that. And so my preference then was for the board, given that I, as a minister, had gone as far as I could in those circumstances, as I saw in terms of my discretion, as far as I could, I then said to the board, they must now handle this process going forward. My attempts at mediating this conflict is certainly not working.
Oh, so, in other words, your position at the time that the then president made his proposal or decision, your position was that the resolution of this matter should be left to the board.
And in later, during the two judgments, Mr. Moraga went to court on these issues and on appeal. And both courts held that the CEO position, although the minister has authority to appoint at an AGM the CEO at Transnet, in effect, the employment contract is with the board. And therefore, it's not with the minister, and therefore the minister does not have the powers to intervene in that employment contract. And in fact, that was the advice that was given me by Michael Katz, the senior counsel, when I first met with him when this all blew up. He said there are two aspects here. One is Mr. Moraga's position as a director and Mr. Moraga's position as a CEO. So the courts confirmed my position on that.
But your position at the time that the former president spoke to you and said you must decide which version is correct, in effect, your attitude was, let's leave this matter to the board to do what it believes it should do.
Yes.
Yes.
But I undertook to convey and to try and persuade the board to go along with the president's decision on this matter. I wasn't trying to stop him, but I wanted it to be conveyed that this was a presidential decision, not my decision.
Does that suggest that if the board and Mr. Moraga had accepted this proposal, if it was a proposal, does that suggest that you would have been prepared for purposes of having finality on this matter to play the role that had been suggested by the former president?
Yes, because the board had consented to that process then.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can we now move to what was the reaction of the board? Remember that you have now had the meeting with the president. He has conveyed what he has conveyed to you. And you met with the board, what was the board's reaction?
So I met with the board. Of course, it was Sunday. They were anticipating that on Monday they would have to, speak to South Africa and explain who was the CEO and what was going on and whatever. And I conveyed the president's view of how this must be resolved. They were dismayed. And I had to do a lot of persuasion and talking through and whatever. And Bobby Gotzel then said, look, in the view of the fact that the president is trying to resolve this matter, we will take it in good faith that he is, but on one condition, that we meet with the president ourselves and put forward our point of view on this matter.
Did the board meet with the president?
They did. They went ahead and arranged for them to meet with the president later that afternoon. They met with the president, and the president had met, well, I was uncertain because I was told that the president had previously met with Moraga, but I know that the president at a certain stage met with Mr. Moraga.
Now, what I want to know is that if the board, before I go there, what was the outcome of that meeting? What was the agreement between the board, if any, with the president in that
Yes, the board said that they would go along with that process on condition that when Mr. Moraga is reaffirmed as a CEO, that he immediately takes leave, because it was creating problems in the organization, him in the office, no one understanding from the staff who is now running the organization and whatever. And so the president agreed to that.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Makwana, just for the sake of completeness, were you present at that board meeting, the meeting of the board with the president, or not really?
No, I felt that the president needed to meet with the board without my intervention.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
But were you informed as to what transpired at that meeting?
Well, yes, the board then came back and later that evening, and we met because we then had to discuss the modalities of how this is conveyed to the public, how it's conveyed to the senior management, how we take this process forward to diffuse a really confusing situation.
Yes.
Before you finalize, I think the question that I asked caused some problem between you and Mr. Makwana. I think he was still wanting to establish from you in terms of what was reported to you by the board, the full extent of what was agreed between the board and the president. You have said that one aspect was that Mr. Moraga would take special leave or something, but I think you had not said as to what would then happen in his absence, or until
He would take
when
special leave
that
in
special
order.
leave would be.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Sorry, or until when, how long that special leave would be, and what would happen in the meantime?
He would take special leave in order to prepare his statement to me. And the board equally would produce a statement, but the board wanted him not to be in office until the issues of whether he stays on as CEO was properly resolved.
What I fail to understand and what brings confusion on this aspect of the evidence is that if the board believed that their decision was correct and that they were acting in the best interest of Eskom at the time, and they've made a decision, why did they agree with the approach which was proposed by the president?
I cannot speak for the board, so I can't exactly say what was the motivation. I know that I had to engage very robustly with the board because the board was not happy with this decision. But finally, as Mr. Gotzel said, the president is trying to resolve this matter. It would be disrespectful of us not to take the president's views into consideration. And therefore, we are all trying to resolve this very difficult matter. And so therefore, we will take the advice of the president, and this is what we will do.
So it seems to have been a way of reaching some compromise by effectively making a suggestion of something else that should be incorporated into the president's proposal. The president's proposal did not originally include that Mr. Moraga should take special leave.
Yes.
But they made that suggestion to the president that if you include this as part of the proposal, we would accept.
Correct.
Okay.
I understand the issues of respect and how the board wanted this issue to be resolved. I'm asking this question simply having in mind the duties and obligations, of the board members, with reference obviously to the company law and the PFMA, that they've taken a decision, they've resolved.
Sorry, could you just speak a bit in the mic? It's going, the sound is going, sorry.
Yes, I'm saying that I was asking this question, having in mind the duties of the board members in terms of the PFMA, their obligations in terms of the Companies Act. They've taken a decision where they have actually accepted a resignation. I take it that it was in terms of a resolution of the board. Now, how does one deal with the proposal post facto of the president whereby Mr. Moraga has to come back? That's what I was trying to interrogate with you.
Yes. You know, they accepted it. There was a lot of reservation. They accepted it in good faith. But they were not happy. But, you know, the one condition was that he doesn't come back to office because it's too confusing.
And then do you know as to why did Mr. Bobby Kotzel resign?
Well, as the board had come back and reported to me about their discussions with the president, and as we were having discussions on the way forward about how this process would now evolve, I got a telephone call from the president to say that Mr. Moraga, you know, the deal is off because Mr. Moraga does not accept it. That
did not accept the proposal.
Yes, the proposal, that he be placed on leave.
He still wanted simply to be affirmed as the CEO and didn't want to take special leave.
And at that point, you know, I remember one board member just, you know, the board was furious, and this board member said, you know, who is he to think he's got these powers to do this to us? You know, Mr. Moraga, who does he think he is? And then the board was really angry because they themselves, against their better judgment, had gone along with this process in order to try and resolve a situation that was not good for the country or for Eskom. At that point, Mr. Kotzel said, I'm now resigning. I can take no further responsibility for this. The other board members were wavering whether they should resign or not, and my understanding is that they felt they would go on and we would have to try and resolve the situation. It was enormously embarrassing for me as a minister.
I'm sorry, before you proceed, when the president called you while you were getting a report from the board and said Mr. Moraga was not accepting the proposal, did he put forward what should then happen in the light of that?
No, he just said the deal was off.
Okay.
Mr. Moraga does not accept it.
In the context of that answer, you also say in paragraph 80 that you had a heated argument with the president on this matter. Are you able to share with us the details of that debate? Paragraph 80, 80.
No, well, that
19.
is the following day.
Yes.
The following day, I was going to Eskom. I was en route to Eskom.
Okay, I'm sorry, before the following day. For the rest of that day, is there anything of importance that happened?
Well, this was already past midnight. Remember, I'd spoken to the president at lunchtime. There'd been meetings with the president in Pretoria, discussions going forward. So the board had, you know, we had all stayed awake right until very late at night.
Had Mr. Kotzel withdrawn after saying he was resigning, or did he still stay on and not implemented his
No,
decision?
he said he was resigning. Mr. Kotzel had earlier, in that confrontation with Mr. Moraga before me, said that the stress of the situation of being chaired Eskom had caused him to have shingles. It had affected him physically, not only just mentally. And I could see that he just saw no way forward on this matter.
So he withdrew from the meeting after saying he was resigning or not? So did you go on without him with the board?
I can't remember.
You can't remember?
Yeah,
okay.
but he didn't, I can't remember him trying to influence. Anyway, we then decided that we would meet the next morning to discuss how, you know, what was going to be conveyed, how we were going to manage this. You know, we were left once again without a decision. So en route there, the president phoned me.
That is now the following day.
The following day.
The 9th?
Yes.
Okay.
On the following day, I was en route to the Eskom headquarters when I received a phone call from the president to say that he had given Mr. Moraga permission to return as the CEO of Eskom. Of course, we had a heated discussion on that.
Yes.
Well, tell us about the heated discussion.
Well, I said, you know, Mr. President, that is not going to solve anything. And you're now using your authority above the board to resolve this matter, and this is not going to solve any problem. Nevertheless, he said, I have given him the permission to go back as CEO of the board.
Now, when the ex-president said that he had given Mr. Moraga permission to return to Eskom, do you know whether he had engaged with the cabinet before he had actually given that instruction?
No, this was a weekend.
And do you know whether did he at least engage with the board prior to him giving Mr. Moraga that decision to return back?
No, he had spoken to me. This was the first the board had heard of it.
Now, may I also refer you to, on the same paragraph, you are talking about we are saying that on the same day, if you look on paragraph 80, I think it's the fourth line, you say that on the same day, 9 September, you meant it should be amended to say November, am I right?
Yes. It's the 9th of September, on the same day, 9th of September.
No, if you look at the top, the first line, it says
Yes.
9th November, 2009.
No, this is 9th of November. Yes, it's 9th of November.
Now,
not
when you
September.
say the same day,
Yes.
it should be the 9th of November, not September.
Correct,
Am I
correct.
right? If
What
we may-
paragraph is that?
It's paragraph 80,
The
page
last,
19.
yeah,
Oh, okay, so
it's the 9th of November, yes.
we'll correct that. Thank you.
It should read, Mr. Chair, on the same day, the 9th November 2009,
Yes.
Mr. Moraga arrived at Eskom, accompanied by Jimmy Manye and a few others, and went upstairs to his office. Now,
Let her tell us about that.
Yes.
Let's hear it from her.
Yes. I was not there at the time because after I'd received that information, I returned to my office. And
I'm sorry. You were en route to Eskom headquarters?
But once the president
Yes.
had indicated that Mr. Moraga was to return, I returned to my office.
Yes.
I needed
Now-
to consult with my staff, but there was some of my staff members already there at the offices because they were awaiting, you know, to give me advice and whatever on the process going forward. So I was informed that a small posse of people kind of accompanied Mr. Moraga through the building, into the lifts and up to his office, and that Mr. Manye was part of that. That, I understand, is incorrect, so I withdraw that. Mr. Manye had a lot to say about this via the Black Management Forum and, you know, the persecution. Once again, I was being accused of persecuting a black executive. But I'm quite happy to withdraw that Mr. Manye was part of that posse. I checked with Eskom itself, the chair of the board, who was later the chair of the board, and he says it was a NUMSA collective that escorted Mr. Moraga back to his offices.
That is the reason why I was reading that part of the statement in order to refer you to the second file of Exhibit L, if you may turn to page 634. You will
So in effect, you are saying, to the extent that your statement in paragraph 80 includes that Mr. Manyi was there when Mr. Moraga returned to Eskom. That is not correct. Mr. Manyi was not there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So as it relates to the sworn affidavit of Mr. Manyi, which was submitted to the commission, you'll see that on page 634, he in fact dispute your paragraph 80, and that is as per paragraph 3 of that affidavit. So
Correct.
that's exactly that we are saying that we were mistaken about
Yes,
that.
yes.
Let's go back to the telephone call from the president when you were en route to Eskom. Did what the president tell you then what was your understanding of what the way forward was then?
I had no understanding. It was part of the reason why I wanted to go back to my office to discuss this matter through with my deputy minister and others, because this was now a very serious crisis.
But on the face of it, it seems to me, and you are free to comment, it seems to me that unless you tell us something else that happened that might have a bearing on this, it seems to me that what you were told on the phone by the former president amounted to saying Mr. Moraga was going to continue as CEO of Eskom, and there was nothing really to be done about, as far as the president was concerned, about the board's view that he had offered to resign and that accepted that. But having said that, I think I must say that should not necessarily mean that he didn't have in mind that the board could do whatever it considered it had a right to do. In other words, if it decided that it would dismiss him, it may well be that he was not excluding that. But what he said to you just does seem to say, look, Mr. Moraga will continue as CEO, and then the board must decide whether they accept that or they decide to do whatever they decide.
That is one possibility, certainly. Another possibility is that the board would resign. And I'd seen the exasperation of the board members, and that would have been an even further disaster.
Of course, you must be right that there would be a risk that if the board was not prepared to accept that Mr. Moraga was to continue as CEO, and that they would therefore see this as the president's taking the side of Mr. Moraga, that they could then resign. That must
Yes.
have been a logical possibility.
It would have been perceived that the president had taken the side of Mr. Moraga.
Ms. Hogan, may I refer you to Annexure N? You'll find it on page 370. You will see that it is a letter dated the 9th of November, addressed to you and signed by Mr. Moraga. Are you there?
Do you want me to speak to this letter?
Please, maybe in all fairness to Mr. Moraga, read the contents of the letter and you can comment
Yes.
about what is written there.
On that same day that Mr. Moraga returned to his office, he issued a letter addressed to me and the Eskom board, and CC'd, obviously, to the board, the executive committee of Eskom, all managing directors of Eskom, the Minister in the Department of Energy, the Portfolio Committee in Parliament of Public Enterprises, and the Portfolio Committee of Energy in Parliament. But it was addressed to me. It said, Dear Minister, I wish to affirm the following with regard to my status as Chief Executive and Director of Eskom. 1. I remain the Chief Executive and the Director of Eskom. 2. The shareholder at the highest level have confirmed that any action regarding my status as Chief Executive and Director of Eskom must be requested formally and granted by the shareholder. I have affirmed that no request has been formally lodged and none has been granted. 3. I've been told that all unauthorized actions taken by the Board of Directors since the 28th of October 2009 are now rescinded. 4. I am at work in my office in Megawatt Park. 5. Everyone should cease and desist from any action or communication that undermines the confidence in Eskom and demoralizes the employees during this critical time. And 6, as a director, I will fully participate in all board activities. And then it ends off, in the interest of Eskom and the country, I am continuing the leadership process that is transparent and collaborative, as well as moving forward with the vision I have outlined and the changes I intend to make to build the Eskom required for this critical economic developmental stage of our democracy. Yours sincerely, PJ Moraga, the Chief Executive of Eskom.
This letter was written by Mr. Moraga after the ex-president having said that he has decided that he must return to Eskom.
Well, my understanding of the shareholder at the highest level, he was referring to the president, yes. And the president confirmed with me that he had given him the permission to return.
Yes. Do you wish to comment further on this letter?
Well, you know, this letter was almost a declaration of independence of the board and of the minister, and saying from henceforth I will only, any action taken against me will have to, or taken in relationship to me, will have to be taken with the assent and consent of the president. It was a complete flouting of everything relating to corporate governance in Eskom or in any company, and a complete arrogance about his position, the board, what he was saying, and you know, it's in this last paragraph. That plan that he had for taking Eskom forward, which constituted the heart of the criticisms of what the board had, that he will now implement that plan. It was, in effect, a CEO who had gone rogue completely, on the understanding that the president would back him. When I received this letter,
yes,
the Deputy Minister and I were completely angered.
I'm sorry, before you proceed, I don't want to disturb your train of thought. Is it your understanding that whatever Mr. Moraga says in his letter he had been told, which it stipulates here, is it your understanding that he seems to say he was told by the shareholder at the highest level, or is your understanding that it might mean he has been told by other sources?
Well, my understanding is that the President confirmed certain aspects of this letter. Firstly, the President had confirmed that Moraga remains a Chief Executive Officer. Now, the second part where he says the shareholder at the highest level, in other words, the President, has confirmed that any action regarding my status as the Chief Executive and the Director of Eskom must be requested formally and granted by the shareholder. Now, which shareholder is he referring to? Is he referring to the President or to me?
Did you get an impression that there might have been private meetings between the President and Mr. Moraga?
Yes, and that impression, it's in paragraph, I forget which paragraph here, but when I was making arrangements through my office for the President to meet with Mr. Moraga, after that Sunday meeting, the housekeepers, because you went through the housekeeper then, the housekeeper said, but Mr. Moraga's already been here.
I think it's paragraph 77 on page 18.
Yeah, paragraph 77. He said, but Mr. Moraga has already met with the President. Is he coming again? And I sent an SMS to Mr. Moraga and it said, it appears that this meeting with the President is no longer necessary. And I already did it in good faith. And in his court application, Mr. Moraga then said that I had lied to him, that he needn't go and see the President. So this is all very confusing to me, but it does seem to appear that at some stage, the President did meet with Mr. Moraga, and when the President spoke to me, he confirmed that he had given Mr. Moraga the permission to return to Eskom.
Now you have received Annexure N. What happens? How do you react to the contents of Annexure N?
N, yes. As I was saying, the Deputy Minister and I were just completely devastated by this. It was clear that the President had encouraged a CEO to believe that he was above company law, above corporate governance, and only saw himself as personally accountable to the President.
And did this letter, as you understand it, mean that, according to Mr. Moraga, any disciplinary action, for example, against him would have to be sanctioned by the President?
Yes.
Okay.
So that, it was out of the hands of the board, it was now. And then the defiance. I will continue with my strategic plan, even though the board is unhappy with it, I will continue, regardless of the board. Now, Chair, I had already gone through the previous months, June, July, August, September, with matters relating to Mr. Gama in that same year. And I had previously experienced how the President saw his role. We then come to an issue with the CEO of Eskom. And the President goes further than he did with Mr. Gama, and he actually just installs someone in the position as CEO, does not even consult with me. And my view at that point was that my executive authority had been completely taken away by the President. I did not see my way clear of that, what was to happen in the future. And I was of the view that because I no longer enjoyed the confidence of the President or could exercise my responsibilities as a minister, that I should resign. I thought that I should address Parliament because as a Cabinet Minister, I am accountable to Parliament.
Now, just before you proceed, just in terms of timelines, just help us there. are you now talking as around the time of the Eskom issue, or are you talking in terms of an earlier time? Thinking of addressing Parliament?
I'm talking about the cumulative effects of the President's behavior throughout that whole year. And you know, there are other things which I didn't bring to the Commission because I can talk a lot about all sorts of other things. But the Eskom situation finally crystallized to me the extent to which the President himself would just assume authority on which he did not have the authority, but would just act outside of his broad mandate. And I decided that I would resign. I made arrangements to go to Parliament. I requested of the Speaker.
I'm sorry. I know you would like to tell us at this stage this, but I'm trying to make sure that my interruption doesn't put Mr. Makwana into a problem in terms of what he wants.
Not at all.
I asked you a question at a time when he had asked you a question about what happened after this letter, and you had begun to tell us that you had a discussion with your deputy. Then I asked you a question. After my question, you had answered my question. Then you began to tell us about how you were feeling. So maybe you should first finish.
Well, that's what I am doing. I'm responding to Advocate Makwana's leading.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine.
On what did I do afterwards?
Yes.
So I then decided to resign. I requested formally the Speaker for a slot in Parliament. The reason why I did that is that firstly, a minister is accountable to Parliament. But secondly, my experience of what was happening filled me with a foreboding of what would come. And I felt that it was necessary that in my going, I at least give an alert of how the President was exercising his authority to the country at large. And this is not an easy thing to do, but you try as a cabinet minister, and I saw many cabinet ministers, you will protect a president, you will defend a president, because a president is often under attack for all sorts of reasons. You don't act without integrity on that. But it was my view at that stage that the President was showing very unfortunate signs of imposing his authority without due consideration of his office and of the constitutional framework in which we operated. And I felt it was necessary to do that. Anyway, what in effect happened, do you want me to go on?
Yes.
The Deputy Minister was also enraged, and he then went to Luthuli House.
This is now after...
I didn't go down to Cape Town yet.
After you had discussed with your deputy the letter Annexure N that came from Mr. Moraga.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was enraged. And he knew that there was a meeting taking place of the senior office bearers, and he went and he requested permission to address, as I understand it, and he presented them with this letter from Mr. Moraga and said, "Do you see what you have done to the President?" I then received a call from the President. No, Mr. Moraga then received a telephone call from the President to say that he must vacate that office immediately and that he would only go back on my authority. Mr. Moraga then vacated his office, and I went down to Parliament to make a public statement about the position of the CEO of Eskom.
Before Mr. Moraga vacated the office, did Mr. Yunus Sheikh play any role in these issues?
Yes. Mr. Yunus Sheikh had been appointed, he's a labor lawyer, and has done extensive work with the CCMA as a mediator. And in Minister Alec Irwin's time, he acted as a labor advisor to the ministry and the department on labor-related matters. And when I was there, he was dealing with a grievance from a particular employee arising from a time before me. And when all of this first started up at the, when Mr. Moraga first denied that he had resigned, the Director General at the time suggested that we bring in Mr. Sheikh because of his labor expertise. And I can confirm in 2010, Mr. Sheikh and other people via the CCMA managed to resolve some very serious labor disputes, both in Eskom and in Transnet. So I can confirm that. So we briefed Mr. Sheikh, the DG briefed Mr. Sheikh, and his view was that he was quite horrified. And his view at that point was that the president had disregarded all protocols on corporate governance. And he undertook, because of he knew the president, to speak to the president and try and persuade the president that, this was not acceptable. And he would on occasion phone me and, talk about what he was trying to achieve. Anyway, at that point, we had to now discuss Mr. Moraga's departure from Eskom. This wasn't going to be any now that, Mr. Moraga will come back in disciplinary proceeding. This had been a total flouting of authority. And the president was aware that this was taking place, and I requested the acting chair of Eskom, Mr. Makwana, to meet with Mr. Moraga and with Mr. Sheikh to negotiate an exit package. Mr. Makwana later gave evidence in court that he'd been informed that Lakela Kaunda from the president's office would be present. I'm not sure. She wasn't present. But there was a three-way thing. Mr. Moraga, myself, the president, and of course Mr. Sheikh and Eskom. And after they had met, I received a report from Mr. Makwana, the chair, to say that they had met for several hours with Mr. Moraga. Mr. Moraga simply refused to accept any notion that he should exit. Any discussion on an exit package. I understand that Mr. Sheikh lost his temper at that point and said, "Who the hell do you think you are?" etc., etc., with apologies for language. And Mr. Moraga, and then the negotiations ceased. And it was then, I then announced that Mr. Moraga, his resignation had been accepted and he had left Eskom in Parliament.
But he left ultimately. Mr. Moraga left Eskom ultimately.
Yes, he left. He then phoned me, it was probably the next day, to ask me when I was going to allow him to return. And I said, there's not that possibility.
And this was around what date now?
This was around,
His letter is 9 November.
yes, this, I addressed Parliament on the 12th of November, so it must have been the 10th and the 11th. And it must have been around the 11th of November. We could get the exact date from the court records.
Now, when you announced that in Parliament that he had resigned, was that because were you basing that on the alleged resignation, offer to resign that the board had said it had accepted, or was the position that after all the discussions involving Mr. Yunus Sheikh, there was a fresh resignation from him?
I simply said he was no longer CEO, as I recall. I haven't got the speech before me, but that he was no longer the CEO. I didn't want to go into details.
Oh, okay. Or you didn't say he had resigned. You said he is no longer the CEO.
CEO of Eskom.
Okay, all right.
Yes, and I spoke about the politicization of boardrooms in my speech. Incidentally, I had requested that the president be present when I gave that speech. He was down in Cape Town at that point, and he did not make himself available, but the deputy president sat there.
Do you know as to who was appointed after Mr. Moraga has left?
Then later, Mr. Brian Damas, who was a senior manager at Eskom, he was also a nuclear engineer, but long time in Eskom, was appointed as the CEO. But in the interim, I requested and was allowed to appoint Mr. Makwana as both the chair and the acting CEO. It's not good ever to have the conflation of those two roles. And my view at that time was that Eskom had gone through a severe crisis. No one knew who was a manager, no one knew who could give authority on anything. It was totally bewildering in the staff, and there was all rumors and things flying around. And Mr. Makwana is an exceptionally calm man with a huge amount of gravitas and integrity. And I felt more than ever he needed to hold that organization together, to see it through a very rocky time. And that his stint as a director of Eskom for a fair amount of time had enabled him to understand what was necessary going forward. And he very, very graciously accepted to do that, and that's a huge task, to try and bring calm and stability back to an organization that had been thrust into crisis, and I will always be grateful to him for the role that he played.
Now, Ms. Hogan, you have also testified, you have now testified about what you referred to as improper and irregular interferences in relation to the appointments of the boards and the CEOs of the SOEs, with reference to Transnet and Eskom. Now, how does Safcol, SAFCOL, feature within that?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm
Before
sorry.
you start on that, can we go back a little bit? You began to say that after your deputy had gone to Luthuli House with the letter from Mr. Moraga, you received a call from the president. But if I recall correctly, before you could tell us what that what the president said to you, you jumped to saying the president called Mr. Moraga. You understood that he had called Mr. Moraga and said what he said. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, you didn't complete the picture by telling us what the president said to you.
My apologies for that. The president did call me afterwards and said that he instructed Mr. Moraga to vacate the position, and that he had told Mr. Moraga that he would only go back was on my authority.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, before you also go to Safcol, can we clarify something on paragraph 85? 85. On page 19.
19, on page 85.
Just to complete the picture about Mr. Gotzel, what then happened about him?
After the discussions had been finished with Mr. Moraga, Mr. Sheikh also phoned me to give, an account. The chair at first phoned me of Eskom. And in that, he said he had reported back to the president, and the president had said to him that I should consider requesting Mr. Gotzel to come back into the position as chair. We all know that Mr. Gotzel is a long-standing businessman with a huge amount of executive experience and board experience and knowledge. On those grounds, I then contacted Mr. Gotzel and I said this had been a request, and he said he'd like to think about it. I saw in the media that the president denied later on that he had made that request of me. Mr. Mantashe contacted me and said that Mr. Gotzel must not be asked back, and he put it as crudely, if a black guy's got to go, then the white guy must also go. And the president then phoned me and said that Mr. Gotzel must not come back. I pointed out that Eskom would now have an acting chair. And once again, there was no response to that.
Yes.
When Mr. Mantashe spoke to you and said if the black guy goes, the white guy must also go, this was at a time when you had already conveyed to Mr. Gotzel the president's request that he should come back. Did you then have to go back to
I had
Mr.
to.
Gotzel?
It was extremely embarrassing. But Mr. Gotzel appreciated the fact that if the president did not have confidence in him, it would be futile for him to go back. That's not a way to treat, once again I say, that's not a way you treat members of a board and the chair of a board. COSATU issued a statement in support of Mr. Gotzel, and said that he'd been one of, and spoke of him in very praiseworthy terms. So this wasn't, pressure from the Tripartite Alliance or whatever. I don't know what did that, but I was grateful to Mr. Gotzel for his understanding, but extremely embarrassed.
Yes.
But of course, the fact that the president asked you to ask Mr. Gotzel to return as chair can't be an indication that the president did not have confidence in Mr. Gotzel.
No. What was conveyed to me by Mr. Sheikh was that the president had requested it. The president later denied it, as I saw in media, and the president phoned me and said Mr. Gotzel must not come back as a chair. He had in effect resigned, and he should stay resigned.
Yes. And then you had to speak to Mr. Gotzel a second time about the latest developments. Okay, all right, thank you.
I take it that by nodding, you're saying yes to the chairperson's question.
Oh, yes, sorry, thanks.
Now, what seemed to confuse me a little, Ms. Hogan, about this testimony is the last sentence on paragraph 85, where you say that Gordhan Mantashe made a similar demand that we have not clarified, but the second portion you are saying that although during this entire episode, he had made it quite clear to me that he did not support what the president was doing. Can you please, elaborate on that and just clarify that issue?
Yes. What I meant there, and I agree it's ambiguous, is that throughout this tussle with Mr. Moraga, Mr. Mantashe was saying, I'm not getting involved with this. I don't agree with what the president is doing, and I'm not getting involved. And he did stay more or less right out of that. There wasn't, the series of statements from the ANC or anything like that. It was only when the issue of Mr. Gotzel came up that he intervened.
Yes.
Well, I guess it may or may not well be that it was just a suggestion that in the light of what had happened, it might not be good for Eskom if one of them continued. It might just have been just a suggestion.
It
Yes.
could have been.
Yes.
There might have been real reasons for that.
Well, one might not know what the reasons were for it, for the suggestion that if the one goes, the other must go. But it may well be that it wasn't a bad thing, in the sense that if Mr. Moraga if the final decision had been that Mr. Moraga must continue, the board would have felt very aggrieved, and maybe, well, not maybe, I think from what you have told us, certainly Mr. Gotzel would have resigned. Maybe more members of the board would have resigned than just him. And then maybe if Mr. Moraga left and Mr. Gotzel continued in circumstances where it appeared that the two of them had very sharp differences, and maybe that's why there was this big problem, it may be that it would be seen as one of them has won, another one has lost, whereas maybe if you say, look, we don't necessarily say who is right, who is wrong, but just to solve the problem going forward, it might be better to do without both of them. Maybe that might be another way of looking at it.
It's hypothetical, certainly. Another way of looking at it, too, is that Mr. Gotzel had resigned.
No, that's true,
And
yes.
so then to ask him to come back might have
Yes.
been problematic.
Yeah. Thank you.
On page 20 of your witness statement, from paragraph 88 to page 21, paragraph 92, you are dealing with the issues relevant to Safcol. Can you please take us through those issues and explain to us how they are relevant to the improper interferences that you have testified about thus far?
Yes. Safcol is a South African forestry company limited. During the period of restructuring and whatever, a large amount, a wide area of forests that belonged to the South African government were sold off. And Safcol is a small component of a larger component.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I don't make the mistake that I made earlier on in regard to the Eskom issue. Can you just confirm in terms of timelines, when is this Safcol issue happening?
This is now happening in 2010.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. This is closer to the time that I was removed.
September
Yes.
2010.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is when I was trying to get the Transnet cabinet memorandum through and a Safcol memorandum.
This was before the offer to Finland.
It was?
Before the offer to Finland.
Yes, before I was going to go off to Finland, yes. I submitted a cabinet memorandum for the AGM of Safcol was due on the 28th of September. So I submitted a cabinet memorandum in anticipation of that to be able to appoint a board to Safcol at the annual general meeting. And I'd been informed by the Cabinet Secretariat that the President wanted to discuss certain matters before it goes to the subcommittee relating to both Transnet and to Safcol. I spoke to the President telephonically, and the President wanted the CV and more understanding of the person I was appointing as the chair of Safcol. So I sent 2 letters to the President confirming our telephonic conversation and attaching the CVs of candidates for chair of Transnet and of Safcol.
Will those letters be Annexure O?
Yes, that's correct.
Before we go to Annexure O, Mr. Chair, I'm informed that it's now lunch adjournment.
Yes.
Yes. No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We are going to take the lunch adjournment.
Okay.
And we will resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
Thank you.